It was just another slow morning at a quiet roadside diner, the kind of place where time moved gently and the smell of coffee hung in the air. At a corner booth sat an elderly widow named Margaret. Her silver hair framed a kind, wrinkled face that had seen both love and loss. She came here every Sunday, ordered the same breakfast, black coffee, buttered toast, and a smile for whoever served her. But this morning, peace didn't last long. Across the room, a man in his 30s, loud, arrogant, full of swagger, leaned back in his chair and stared at her with a smirk. He was the type who fed off attention, always needing someone smaller to pick on. When the waitress passed by, he muttered something crude about old people wasting space. Margaret pretended not to hear. But then the bully got up, swaggering toward her booth. He slammed his hand on her table, startling her.
"Didn't you hear me, Grandma?"
He sneered. "You're holding up the line with your shaking hands." The entire diner fell silent. Forks stopped midair. The sound of sizzling bacon from the kitchen was the only thing that moved. Margaret tried to smile, her voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry if I've inconvenienced you, young man." But he wasn't looking for an apology. He was looking for dominance. He laughed cruelly, mocking her tone, leaning close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You think being old gives you the right to be slow?" Someone whispered, "Leave her alone." But no one stepped forward. The waitress froze near the counter, torn between fear and fury. Margaret looked down, clutching her small purse, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from decades of holding herself together. Then came the moment that changed everything. The bully reached out and slapped her coffee cup, spilling it all over her lap. Gasps filled the diner. Margaret flinched more from shock than pain, and from the far end of the counter, a man stood up quietly, adjusting his sunglasses. He didn't say a word, but the room suddenly felt heavier, colder, because the bully had no idea. He had just crossed Steven Seagal's mother. The diner froze. You could hear nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator and the slow drip of spilled coffee hitting the floor. Margaret sat there, her lap soaked, eyes wide but unbroken. The bully grinned, proud of himself, puffing out his chest like he'd just conquered something meaningful. No one spoke, not even the waitress who stood behind the counter with trembling hands gripping a coffee pot. Everyone wanted to help, but fear kept them glued to their seats. The bully turned to the silent crowd, laughing. "What's the matter? None of you ever seen a joke before?" He barked, scanning the room for approval. Nobody responded. Heads dropped, eyes turned away. Then, from the far end of the diner, the man in sunglasses, tall, calm, and broad-shouldered, started walking forward. Step by step, slow, controlled, purposeful, the bully noticed him coming and smirked. "Oh, we've got a hero now, huh?" He didn't know. He had no idea who he was talking to. Steven Seagal stopped beside his mother's booth. He didn't say a word at first, just looked at her gently, placing one hand on her shoulder.
"You okay, Mom?"
he asked, his voice low and steady, but with an edge sharp enough to slice through the tension in the air. Margaret managed a faint smile. "I'm fine, Steven. Please don't cause trouble." Her voice cracked just slightly, and that small sound, that motherly softness, sent a quiet chill through the room. The bully chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, so you brought your bodyguard, huh?" he sneered, stepping closer. "Cute." Steven didn't move, didn't blink. His stillness was scarier than any punch could have been. The waitress whispered under her breath, "Oh my God, that's Steven Seagal." Her words rippled through the diner like a secret too heavy to contain. Heads turned, whispers spread. But the bully? He laughed louder, too blind with arrogance to see the warning signs. Steven's eyes stayed locked on him, calm, focused. "Apologize to her," he said quietly. The bully blinked. "What did you say?" "I said, apologize now." The tone wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But it had a weight, the kind of authority that makes grown men feel small. The bully chuckled again, trying to save face. "Or what, you gonna fight me? You think being some washed-up action star makes you tough?" He stepped forward, close enough that his breath fogged the lenses of Steven's glasses. That's when Steven leaned in, voice low enough for only him to hear. "Son, you're about 3 seconds away from a lesson you'll never forget." The bully hesitated. For the first time, you could see uncertainty flicker in his eyes. The crowd watched, and silent, tense. Phones were out now, recording. Someone whispered, "Don't do it, man. Just walk away." But arrogance is a dangerous thing. He laughed again, loud and shaky, and shoved Steven's shoulder. That single touch felt like a spark hitting gasoline. Steven didn't react violently. Not yet. He took one slow step back and looked down at his mother's trembling hands. The diner was silent again, the air heavy with dread. Then softly, Steven looked back at the bully. "Do you have a mother?" The man frowned. "What?" "A mother," Steven repeated, eyes narrowing slightly. "Does she know you talk to women like that?" The bully's smirk faded. "You don't know me, old man." Steven's expression didn't change. "I don't need to. I see the kind of man you are by the way you treat those who can't fight back," the crowd murmured. Truth has a way of cutting through pride. For a brief second, the bully looked unsure, glancing around as if the room had turned against him. Then his ego came roaring back. "You done talking, Grandpa?" He turned toward the door, laughing, but not before muttering one last insult toward Margaret. That was it. Steven's patience snapped, not with rage but with purpose. He reached out steady and fast and grabbed the man's wrist before he could walk away. The bully froze. Steven didn't squeeze and just held his arm still effortlessly. "Next time," he said softly, "you think about who's watching before you touch someone's mother." The bully yanked his arm free, rubbing it in disbelief. He'd felt it, that quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to show off. He backed away slowly, suddenly less sure of his power. Margaret placed a gentle hand on her son's arm. "That's enough, Steven," she said. He nodded once, calm again. The room exhaled. The waitress, finally brave enough to speak, stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I'll get you a towel." Margaret smiled softly. "Thank you, dear. I'm fine now." The tension in the diner began to ease. People whispered to one another, phones still recording, hearts still racing, and before the story moved any further, Steven turned toward the crowd, his deep voice calm and commanding. "Don't ever stay silent when someone's being humiliated," he said. "Because silence, that's what keeps bullies strong." Then, turning to the camera, his eyes met the lens, sharp, direct, almost speaking to every viewer across the world. "If you believe in standing up for the weak, tell me where you're watching this from. Your city, your country. Let's see how far respect can travel." And just like that, the world inside that diner shifted forever. For a few seconds, nobody in the diner moved. The air hung thick, stretched between shock and disbelief. Then a chair creaked, a spoon clinked against porcelain, and life crept back in. Quiet, cautious. The bully straightened his jacket, trying to shake off the tremor in his hands. He looked around the room and saw only faces judging him, phones pointing like silent witnesses. Steven Seagal stood still, one hand resting on the edge of his mother's booth. The calm in his posture was louder than any threat could have been. His eyes followed the bully with that unblinking steadiness that comes only from discipline. No anger, no noise, just control. "Think we're done here," the bully snapped, his voice cracking halfway through. He was trying to save face, to claw back the authority that had slipped through his fingers. Steven tilted his head slightly. "We're done when you make it right," the man scoffed. "Make it right? She's fine. Everyone's fine." His laugh sounded forced, thin and nervous. The people around him weren't buying it. Someone at a nearby table muttered, "Just apologize, man." Another voice added, "You went too far." Steven's mother stayed seated, quiet but firm. She dabbed at the coffee stain on her lap, whispering, "Please, Steven, don't escalate this." But her son didn't need to. The bully was doing that all on his own. The tension started to build again, slow and suffocating. The bully took a step forward, trying to intimidate the older man. "You don't scare me," he said, pointing a finger at Steven's chest. "You think being famous makes you special?" Steven looked down at the hand, then back up, expression unreadable. "No," he said evenly. "What makes a man special is how he treats people weaker than himself." The diner went silent again. Even the jukebox in the corner seemed to hush. "If you were in that diner, what would you have done? Would you step in or stay quiet? Be honest and tell me in the comments. I want to know how you would handle it." The bully's face flushed. He wasn't used to being the one cornered. His eyes darted from the cameras to the crowd, to the calm man who wouldn't break eye contact. The humiliation burned hotter than any slap. He suddenly lunged forward, knocking over a chair. Gasps echoed. Steven didn't move until the very last second. Then, in one fluid motion, he sidestepped and caught the man's wrist mid-swing. The sound was sharp, not violent, but final. Steven held him there, immovable, silent, until the bully's knees began to buckle. Enough, Steven said quietly. The man froze, breathing hard. Steven released him and stepped back, giving him the chance to walk away with what little pride he had left. But the bully didn't move. Pride and shame fought across his face, twisting him into something desperate. Margaret finally spoke, her voice soft but powerful. "Son, please," she said, looking at the bully now, not her own child. "You don't have to live angry. It's heavy carrying hate like that." Something about her words made him hesitate. For a moment his shoulders dropped, his eyes flicked downward, but the whispers around him reignited his temper. He turned toward the crowd. "You all think you're better than me? You don't even know what's going on." He reached for a napkin dispenser and flung it across the counter. It crashed, scattering metal and paper everywhere. The waitress flinched, shielding her face. People started moving, some backing toward the door, others holding up phones higher. Steven stepped between the bully and everyone else. "You've made your point," he said, voice calm but commanding. "Now leave before you make it worse." The bully's breathing was ragged. He looked like a cornered animal, ready to lash out yet already defeated. He shoved his hands in his pockets, glared at the crowd and muttered, "You'll all regret filming this." But the power dynamic had changed completely. Nobody feared him anymore. Steven walked him to the door, not pushing, not threatening, simply guiding. When they reached the exit, he paused and said quietly, "There's still time to be better than this. Don't waste it." The bully hesitated, then stormed out into the parking lot, slamming the door behind him. The glass rattled but didn't break. Inside, the diner slowly began to breathe again. The waitress set the coffee pot down, her hand shaking. "Thank you," she whispered. Someone else clapped softly, then another, until the sound filled the room. Small applause for dignity, not violence. Steven nodded politely, no trace of pride, and turned back to his mother. She looked up at him with that familiar mix of love and worry. "You didn't have to," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "I know, Mom, but I couldn't just sit here." They sat together in silence for a moment, the tension finally melting away. Outside, the morning light poured through the window, warm and forgiving. The world moved on, but everyone in that diner knew they'd just witnessed something they'd never forget. Because sometimes true strength isn't about throwing a punch. It's about standing up quietly, firmly, when no one else will. For a long moment, the diner stayed wrapped in silence. Plates cooled, coffee went cold, and everyone's heart seemed to beat at the same slow rhythm. The storm had passed, but something else began to stir in its place. Curiosity. The man who had stood so calm, so certain, was still standing beside his mother's booth. He wasn't gloating, wasn't even breathing hard. He simply adjusted his sunglasses, checked that Margaret was all right, and sat down again. The waitress approached with a towel. "Ma'am, let me help you with that," she said softly. Margaret smiled, whispering her thanks. The two women exchanged a look, one of quiet understanding, the kind only people who've seen real hardship share. A couple at the counter leaned toward each other. "Wait," the woman murmured. "That guy looks familiar." Her husband squinted. "Yeah, he does." The walk, the voice. "I've seen him somewhere." Another man further down the bar chimed in. "No way, that's Steven Seagal, right?" Heads turned. Whispers began to roll through the diner like a gentle wave gaining strength. "That's him." "Are you serious? I thought he moved out of the country." "No wonder that guy backed down." Steven didn't react. He poured a fresh cup of coffee for his mother, steady hands, relaxed shoulders. But the subtle smile that crossed his face said he'd heard every word. Margaret sighed. "They've recognized you again." Steven shrugged lightly. "It happens, Mom." She shook her head. "You never could stay invisible, could you?" He chuckled. "Guess not." The waitress finally dared to ask, her voice trembling with excitement. "Sir, are you really Steven Seagal?" He looked up, removing his sunglasses for the first time. The moment his eyes met hers, the truth was obvious. Gasps spread across the room. A teenage boy near the window nearly dropped his phone. Someone whispered, "It really is him." Outside, a few passers-by pressed their faces to the window, drawn by the sudden buzz. The diner, once sleepy and still, now hummed with quiet awe. Steven nodded once, almost shyly. Just here to have breakfast with my mother, he said. That's all. The crowd respected that. No one screamed, no one swarmed. Instead, they turned their attention back to the booth, their admiration mixing with a deep sense of pride. They'd just witnessed a movie-worthy moment, but this wasn't acting. This was real. The waitress smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. I've watched every one of your films, she said. But what you did today, that was the best scene of all. Steven smiled faintly. Real life doesn't need stunt doubles, he replied. Laughter broke the tension, light and genuine this time. People began talking quietly, replaying the confrontation, trading the details they'd captured on their phones. Someone said, Man, that video's already online. Another answered, It's going viral right now. Margaret looked around, a little embarrassed. Oh dear, I didn't want to cause a scene. Steven reached over and took her hand. You didn't, Mom. He did. Her eyes softened. Still, I hope that young man learned something from this. Steven nodded slowly. He will. The internet's a mirror. It shows you who you really are. He took a sip of his coffee, watching the sunlight spill across the counter. The buzz in the diner began to settle into a gentle murmur of respect. The waitress refilled cups, people smiled at Margaret. Some even apologized for not stepping in sooner. And then, in the middle of that warmth, one customer at the back raised his phone and said, half joking but full of sincerity, Sir, can I say something? You handled that better than any action movie ever could. Steven looked at him smiling. That's because real strength isn't about who you can hit. It's about who you can protect. The line hit everyone like a quiet truth. You could feel the shift. The moment when admiration became reflection. Outside, the bully's car engine started, tires screeching as he sped away. Inside, the clinking of dishes resumed. The smell of pancakes filled the air, and normal life slowly returned, but now with a story that would travel far beyond those four walls. Margaret leaned back, taking a deep breath. You know, Steven, your father used to say the same thing, she said softly. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Guess some lessons stick. For the rest of that morning, the diner felt different, like a sacred place where courage had been quietly defined. Nobody there would ever forget the look in Steven Seagal's eyes or the gentle way he defended his mother without anger. And as they left, one by one, customers kept glancing back at the booth by the window. The legend sat there, calm and human, holding his mother's hand. Just when everyone thought the storm had passed, the faint growl of an engine rumbled outside the diner again. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped right by the window. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. The waitress whispered, No, it can't be him again. But it was. The same bully, face red, pride burning hotter than ever, stormed back in. His hair was messy, his fists clenched, and his voice thundered through the small space. You think you can embarrass me like that? He shouted, slamming the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. Steven didn't even flinch. He looked up slowly, his calm presence swallowing the chaos around him. Margaret, though steady, tightened her grip on his hand. Steven, she murmured, don't. But her son's eyes stayed locked on the man approaching, steady, sharp, and unafraid. The bully's steps echoed across the diner floor. People shrank back in their booths, waiting to see what would happen next. The waitress moved closer to the phone, ready to call for help. But Steven gave a small shake of his head. Son, he said evenly, his voice deep but calm, you should leave before you make another mistake. That only made the man angrier. Oh, I see how it is. You think you're better than me because you're some kind of movie star? He leaned closer, sneering. You think those fake fights on TV make you tough? Steven stood up slowly. His full height made the man take a step back instinctively. The room seemed to shrink around them, like gravity itself bent toward him. I don't fight for cameras, Steven said quietly. I fight when someone I love is disrespected. The bully smirked, trying to mask his fear. Yeah, what are you gonna do, hit me? Go ahead, tough guy. He shoved Steven's shoulder hard. A few people gasped. Someone muttered, oh no. Steven didn't move. He just looked at the man, calm, controlled, eyes like stone. Then in one swift motion he reached out, grabbed the man's wrist and twisted just enough to make him drop to one knee. No pain, no violence, just precision. The diner fell dead silent. Steven spoke softly, almost like a teacher correcting a student. You see, strength isn't about hurting people. It's about knowing you could but choosing not to. The bully winced, struggling, but Steven eased his grip and let him go. The man stumbled back, clutching his wrist, looking stunned, not just by the hold, but by the restraint. "Now," Steven continued, voice steady, "apologize to my mother." For a long second, the man hesitated. His pride wanted to resist, but the weight of the room crushed that instinct fast. Every eye was on him. The waitress, the families, the old couple in the corner, all waiting to see if he'd do the right thing. Finally, he lowered his head. "Ma'am," he muttered, voice shaking, I'm sorry," Margaret nodded gently. "I forgive you, son. Just remember, no one wins by being cruel." Those words hit harder than any punch. The bully's shoulders sagged. You could see the shift, the moment shame turned into realization. He nodded once and backed away, eyes downcast before slipping out the door into the daylight. The diner exhaled in unison. For a few moments nobody said a word. Then someone began to clap. Another joined in. And soon the whole diner erupted in applause, not for a movie star, but for a son who stood tall with grace, for a man who used strength to protect, not destroy. Steven smiled faintly and bowed his head slightly in thanks, but he didn't bask in the attention. Instead, he sat back down, turned to his mother, and said quietly, "Now, where were we? You were telling me about the garden." Laughter rippled through the room, soft, admiring, full of respect. The tension was gone, replaced by warmth. The waitress came over, still teary-eyed. "Sir," she said, "I think you just taught us all something today." Steven looked up, smiling gently. "I didn't teach you anything new. You already knew it. I just reminded you." That line landed deep. People nodded, feeling the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Not violence, not revenge, but discipline, compassion, and honor. And then Steven turned to the crowd, his tone thoughtful, like he was speaking not just to the diner, but to everyone watching through the lens of 100 smartphones. "Remember this," he said softly. "The world doesn't need more men who can fight. It needs more men who can forgive." A quiet hush filled the diner. Phones recorded, hearts listened. Outside, the wind carried the words like a prayer. By the time Steven and Margaret left the diner, the morning sun had climbed high over the horizon. The air outside felt cleaner, lighter, like the world had exhaled after holding its breath. They walked to the car in silence. Margaret leaned on her son's arm, smiling faintly. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Steven shook his head. "Mom, you taught me never to stay silent when someone's being disrespected. I just followed your lesson." Back inside, the diner buzzed like a newsroom. Phones were out, screens glowing. The waitress had tears in her eyes as she replayed the video someone sent her. The moment Steven calmly disarmed the bully, the words that followed, and Margaret's gentle forgiveness. Every second of it was captured. Every expression, every sound. Within an hour, it hit social media. The first post came from a diner customer on TikTok. This guy stood up for his elderly mom against a bully. Turns out it was Steven Seagal. Real-life hero moment. The clip spread like wildfire. Within minutes, it was on YouTube, Instagram, and X, Twitter. Views skyrocketed. Comment sections exploded with disbelief, admiration, and emotion. Finally, a celebrity with real class. That's the kind of strength this world needs. The way he stayed calm, respect. People began tagging Steven's old movie clips, comparing his on-screen martial arts grace with the quiet control he showed that morning. But this wasn't a choreographed fight. This was a masterclass in self-discipline. News outlets picked it up next. Headlines read, "Steven Seagal protects elderly mother from diner bully, with words, not violence." Viral moment, actor's real-life calm goes global. Within 24 hours, millions had watched it. TV stations replayed it, podcasts analyzed it, and influencers called it the most powerful real-life lesson in respect. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, the bully sat in his small apartment, face lit by the glow of his phone screen. He watched the clip in silence, the scene replaying over and over. Him shouting, her trembling, Steven's calm voice, the crowd's applause. The comments stung more than any punch could. Disgraceful. Hope he learns humility. He just got schooled by a legend. For a long time, he stared at the screen, at the version of himself he couldn't recognize anymore. Then for the first time that day, he lowered his head. Maybe he finally understood. By that evening, reporters were already outside Steven's home, Cameras waiting, asking for statements. But Steven didn't speak. He wasn't chasing headlines or applause. Instead, he released one quiet message online. A short video filmed on his phone, no filters, no effects. "Violence doesn't make you strong," he said simply. "Patience does. Forgiveness does. Real power is knowing when not to use it. My mother taught me that. Respect begins at home, and it should never end there." That clip went even more viral than the diner video. It wasn't just shared, it was felt. Teachers played it in classrooms. Parents showed it to their kids. Even police officers commented, saying they'd use it in training sessions on restraint and respect. The next morning, major outlets worldwide carried the story. BBC, "A moment of calm goes global." CNN, "Seagal's lesson on strength and grace inspires millions." People magazine, "From action star to real-life role model." Back at the diner, tourists started showing up just to see the booth where it happened. The owner put up a small sign on the wall. "Respect was served here." Margaret, ever humble, just laughed when Steven told her. "Well," she said, "at least something good came out of my coffee spill." Steven chuckled. "You always find the light in everything, don't you?" She looked at him with that same warm smile she'd carried through every hardship. "That's how I raised you. Son, if you've ever seen someone stand up for what's right, or if you believe respect is the strongest form of strength, drop A in the comments below and tell us which city or country you're watching this from. Let's see how far this message of humility can reach." By the end of the week, the video had crossed 100 million views. The world didn't just see a celebrity defending his mother. They saw humanity at its finest. No fame, no ego, just grace under fire. And as one commenter beautifully wrote under the viral clip, he didn't just protect his mom, he reminded all of us what it means to be human. Days turned into weeks, but the echo of that diner moment didn't fade. It grew louder, spreading like ripples through a still lake. The story of Steven Seagal and his mother became more than a viral clip. It became a symbol of quiet courage and respect in a noisy, divided world. Talk shows debated it. Motivational speakers quoted it. Even schools began showing the video to students as an example of discipline, love, and restraint. Hashtags like "respect begins at home" and "real strength" trended for days. Steven never bragged about what happened. He didn't do interviews or chase cameras. He simply continued with his life, visiting his mother every Sunday, helping at local charities, walking quietly among the people who now saw him not as a star, but as a man who lived by principle. Margaret, too, became somewhat of a quiet celebrity. Letters poured in, handwritten notes from around the world. One from a young soldier read, "Ma'am, I watched your video before deployment. It reminded me what I'm fighting for. Decency." Another came from a single mother in Brazil. "Your son showed the world that protecting someone doesn't need anger, just love." Every evening, Margaret would sit with a cup of tea, reading these messages aloud to Steven. He'd listen, smiling softly. "You've touched the world, Mom," he'd tell her. She'd laugh and say, "No, you did." But deep down, both knew the truth, and it wasn't about fame or faces. It was about what's right. Meanwhile, the bully, and whose name no one cared to remember, reached out privately. In a message that surprised many, he publicly apologized on his social media, saying, "That day changed me. I saw what real strength looks like. I've started therapy and community work. I want to be better." The internet, so often cruel, responded with rare compassion. People forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because Steven and Margaret's example made forgiveness the right thing to do. Weeks later, Steven returned to the same diner with his mother. The staff greeted them like family. There was laughter, music, and the smell of fresh coffee again, peace restored. The owner had hung a framed picture on the wall, Steven, his mother, and the simple quote beneath it, "In a world that glorifies power, choose respect." Margaret smiled as she looked at it. "That's beautiful," she said. Steven nodded. "That's your legacy, Mom." As they sat down, a family nearby recognized him but didn't ask for pictures. Instead, they simply nodded in gratitude. Respect had become the unspoken language of that little diner. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the window, a perfect ending to a story that had started in pain and ended in peace. If this story moved you, if you believe that true strength lies in kindness, not aggression, type respect in the comments. Tell us where you're watching this from. and share this video to remind the world that power doesn't come from your fists. It comes from your heart. Because one small act of courage can change everything.